Hey guys, welcome to Brian's Man Cave. So today, let's talk about two-player games. Now, what do I mean by that? So, we all know that there's a lot of games that are multiplayer online games today. The modern gaming, it's all about, playing with multiple people. I'm talking about back in the day, the retro games. Now, if you've watched my channel or you know my channel, you know I play a lot of the old stuff. I play the Atari, the Intellivision, ColecoVision. I play the old stuff. Back before there was anything to do with online gaming. And there was games that were specifically one-player games, and then there was two-player games. And then there was games that they were more like one-player games, but they allowed for two players. So let's kind of break that down. Let's kind of talk about it because it's kind of an interesting thing. It's a thing that it's still kind of talked about today. And the reason why I've been thinking about this topic is because again in my last video where I was talking about when I'm working on a new game that I'm building for the Intellivision. I kind of always got in the back of my mind, should I have two-player variant or allow for a second player? So the game I'm working on right now on the Intellivision is Food Fight, which I did a little video on, showing some gameplay on. Now the original Food Fight on the on the Atari 7800, anyways. The arcade maybe a little bit different, but I'm talking about the Atari 7800 version of Food Fight. There's a two-player option. Now, when I say two-player, or when it says two-player, it doesn't necessarily mean co-op. It doesn't mean you get to work together. It just means that player one goes, does what they can do, then player two gets to play. And so I was kind of wondering, is that something that I should really include? Is it necessary? Especially today with retro gamers, a lot of them might not have a second player. So let's kind of go back in time here. I'm going to look at something like, okay, let's go to a classic, Super Mario Brothers. Now, this is my Super Mario Duck Hunt. This is the one that came with my original Nintendo when I got my Nintendo back in the 80s, whenever it was. I don't know what year it was. But anyways, yeah, Mario Brothers, Super Mario Brothers. It's a two-player game, but it's actually a one-player game. It just gives you a secondary player. So when you play as maybe you play Mario, when you die, now your friend gets to play as Luigi, which, let's be real here, Luigi's just a green Mario. There's nothing special about him. There's nothing special about his character. It's not until Mario 2, Super Mario Bros. 2, when Luigi had his own little thing. He had his own little jumping effect and all that stuff. But funny enough, this is a one-player game. This isn't a two-player game. So, yeah, when Super Mario Brothers came out, it had a second player. Now, if you could play the game without dying, you literally played and your opponent just sat there doing nothing. They held onto their controller and they literally could fall asleep. And I know because this happened with me when I used to play with my stepfather. After I introduced him to Nintendo, he just sat there holding the controller while I was like, I completed level 1, now I'm on to level 2, now I'm in the warp zone, now I'm over here, now I'm over here. And he would just be like, practically falling asleep because he never got a turn. Which I thought was kind of odd about it. It's like, what is the point of having a two-player game when you can end up in this kind of scenario? And of course they corrected it with this guy, Super Mario 3, where every time you complete a level, whatever, your opponent gets to play. Plus, they added in the kind of like the original Mario Brothers, that if you go on to a spot where your other player is sitting on, you can essentially play Mario Brothers, which is the original game that this was inspired, that inspired the whole Super Mario series. And so then it's a head-on-head, play against the death kind of thing. Kind of interesting that they did that. I really like that. Whereas, not so much. Super Mario Brothers 2, nothing to do with playing with an opponent. But what I'm getting at is that, is it really important today, especially today with homebrews and retro games, do people really care if something is two-player? How many of us old people like me, we're in our 40s, 50s, whatever's, have people that we can actually sit down and play with? Now, I remember back in the day, I remember when I was a kid, and that was a long time going back, but playing with my friends, my next door neighbors and stuff, and we did play two-player games, periodically. We played this guy. And I've showed this a few times on my channel, boxing. This is one of my favorite games on the Intellivision. And you can only play it two-player. It's only a two-player game. You can't play this well, you can if you want your opponent to just stand there while you beat the crap out of them. But other than that, it's a two-player only game. And if you grew up with the Intellivision, you'll know what I'm talking about. There was quite a few titles where it was two-player only. You had to play with two people. And that was their mentality, I think, back in the day when they invented the Atari and the Intellivision, is they kind of thought that, who's going to want to sit there and play this thing by themselves? Let's make this, you got to play with another person. This is why Atari 2600, or Atari VCS at the day, was packaged with combat. I mean, the very purpose of combat is you have to face your opponent. There was no AI player or artificial intelligence or whatever, computer player or whatever you like to call it. You had to play against your opponent. You had to have a second player. The Intellivision was the same. They looked at it as, you're going to want to play with somebody. You're not going to want to play this by yourself, which essentially is why they built the two Intellivision controllers into the system. Because they're like, you're going to be wanting to play with somebody. And then there's my other favorite game, Utopia. I bought this from a store, Microplay. They don't exist anymore. But I remember picking this up. This is cool. I love this game. My uncle had this game when I was a kid. I didn't have it. But I remember seeing it at his house, and I just loved it. I don't know what it is about it, but I loved it. Now, this is one of those games where a lot of people like to talk about how they wish there was a computer player. Because nowadays, when people like me, my age, we pretty much don't have an opponent or a second player. So we end up playing games like this by ourselves. And this game is kind of like, it's like, think about SimCity. It's like the very first SimCity style game where you get an island, your opponent has an island, you have to build it up with resources, you have to do all this stuff. You're competing against each other. Now, when you play by yourself, it's not as fun. I mean, you're just building stuff on an island. You're trying to get a better score or whatever. The other island just sits there vacant. It gets these rebels all over it. I mean, if you want to play the other island, you grab the other controller and you start building. But there's no AI player. And I know that there's been talk on some of the forums for, the Intellivision forums on the Atari Age website, where people have been asking for this to be redone as not redone, but just kind of build an AI character into it, kind of, patch it up, or make a sequel. And that's the challenge that I've been wanting to myself. Actually, I actually started to plot out my own Utopia sequel, where I'm going to build a game that's kind of taking this game and building on it. But I'm realized, like, making it a two-player only game is probably not a good idea. People who play retro games today, they're probably playing by themselves, let's be real. So I'm going to build a game that's based off of this two-player concept, original, but make it a one-player game and have a computer player or have something else on there. But that's what got me thinking, like, just like I was pointing out, when they made this game, and of course, like I said in a previous video as well, I'm very aware that this was not an original Super Mario Brothers title. This was a game called Doki Doki Panic that they reskinned. But the idea was that, or the fact is, that the first one was considered a two-player game, kind of not, and this one was not. And then they went to the third game where they kind of figured out how to work it in there, how to do it. Even in some arcade games. Now, I remember seeing a post on Facebook where somebody was talking about this, where they said, arcade cabinets where there was a two-player option, and it was usually those sit-down ones. If you remember in the 80s, there was those sit-down cabinets where you sit down, it's like a table, and you play Pac-Man on it, and it's flat. And they were showing like a Space Invaders thing where you were playing on one side, your opponent's playing on the other, and I guess it interacted. Something like that. That's kind of cool that they had things like that in the past. That's your real two-player games. But some of these other ones, like, like the Super Mario Brothers game, and a lot of the other ones, it's really just you play, then you play, then you play, then you play. Is there really any point to that? Is it really a two-player game at this point? Or is it just taking turns playing your own game, playing a one-player game? But anyways, yeah, I thought it would be fun to talk about it because this is the type of thing that, a lot of the older games had. I don't know what's going on with the newer games. I know a lot of it's online, it's all a co-op. Heck, you could even somehow play some of these Atari games online and do a co-op, do it using certain emulators. But anyways, yeah, I thought this was a fun topic. I thought I'd like to throw it up there. Let me know what you think. Throw your comments down below. What are your thoughts on two-player games? And if homebrews and new Atari and television, Coleco, whatever's, Nintendo, should they even bother doing that, having a second player? I'd like to hear what you have to say. Anyways, hope you liked the video, hope you subscribe, and again, we'll talk to you later.